They said lion doesn't know that he's caged until he's let out. I got a taste of freedom. Now I just can't go back into the cage.
There was only one name that mattered: Bumpy Johnson.
The fog choking San Francisco Bay in 1963 was thick enough to suffocate a man. It rolled in off the Pacific like a death shroud, a cold gray blanket smothering the city, erasing the horizon for the men on the ferry deck as it sliced through the chop. To most, it was just weather. But for the man at the stern, staring back at the vanishing silhouette of Alcatraz Island, that fog was a mercy. It was the only thing capable of scrubbing the image of that cursed rock from his mind. Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson, stood perfectly still. His hands rested on the railing, the damp air clinging to his overcoat like a second skin. Technically, he was a free man. The papers were signed. The iron gate clanged shut behind him, and the warden delivered his lecture on becoming a productive member of society. Bumpy hadn't heard a single word. He was listening to the ghost of his own stomach growling. 5 years. That was the sentence on the paperwork. But time inside Alcatraz didn't move in years. It moved in meals, or the lack of them. Bumpy Johnson, the king of Harlem. The man who dined with dukes and movie stars spent the last 60 months learning the true definition of hunger. It wasn't just an empty belly. It was physical agony, a sharp, gnawing rat living inside your rib cage, trying to chew its way out. And this wasn't an accident. It was policy. He closed his eyes, and for a split second, the boat vanished. He was back in the hole. D block, solitary confinement. The darkness was absolute. He could smell the damp concrete and the stench of the unwashed bucket in the corner. He could hear the heavy boots of the guard echoing down the corridor. Clump, clump, clump. The steps stopped. The slot in the steel door slid open. A beam of light cut the dark, blinding him. Then came the voice, "Dinner time, boy." It was Lieutenant Graves. They called him Bulldog because of his jaws and the way he never let go once he bit. Graves didn't just hate inmates. He hated Bumpy specifically. He hated that Bumpy walked with his head held high. He hated that Bumpy read philosophy. He hated that even in a cage, Bumpy Johnson acted like a free man. So Graves decided to break him the way you break a wild horse, by starving the spirit out of him. In the memory, Bumpy crawled toward the door, his body weak, his hands shaking. Graves held a tray. It was garbage, stale bread, a piece of gristle, watery soup, but to a starving man, it was a royal feast. Graves would slide it through the slot, and just as Bumpy reached, Graves would accidentally drop it. The soup splattered on the filthy floor. The bread landed in the waste bucket. "Oops," Graves would say, voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Clumsy me. Better luck tomorrow, Johnson." Then the slot would slam shut, leaving Bumpy in the dark with nothing but the smell of the food. He couldn't eat. Bumpy opened his eyes on the boat. His hands gripped the railing so hard his knuckles turned white. The hunger was gone now. He had eaten eggs and bacon before leaving the processing center. But the rage remained. It sat in his chest, heavy and cold, a stone that would never dissolve. Most men left prison just wanting to go home. They wanted to see their wives, kiss their kids, and forget. Bumpy wanted those things too. He missed May with an ache that defied description. But he couldn't go home yet, not with this stone in his chest. A king doesn't return to his throne with a debt unpaid. If he went back to Harlem now, every time he sat down to a banquet, he would see Graves' face. Every time he drank wine, he would taste that watery soup. To truly be free, he had to balance the books. The boat docked in San Francisco. Bumpy walked down the gangplank, ignoring the reporters gathered for the Harlem Godfather. He pulled his hat low, stepped into a waiting cab, and gave the driver an address that wasn't the airport. It was a motel in Oakland, a nondescript joint with peeling paint and a neon sign that buzzed like an angry hornet. Bumpy checked in as Mr. Ellsworth. The room smelled of cheap pine cleaner and stale cigarettes. It was a palace compared to D Block. He sat on the bed, testing the mattress. It was soft, too soft. He would probably sleep on the floor. He placed his suitcase on the table and cracked it open. Inside, neatly folded, were 3 suits. Mamie had sent fresh shoes and a thick envelope taped to the lining. Bumpy peeled the tape back. He dumped the envelope's contents onto the bedspread. It wasn't money. It was intelligence. For the last 6 months, Bumpy was the model prisoner. He swept floors, worked laundry, and kept his mouth shut. But his eyes and ears were wide open. He used his connections. The Italians who respected him, the black inmates who idolized him, to build a map, not a map of the prison, but a map of the people running it. He knew who was sleeping with whom. He knew who had a gambling problem, and most importantly, he knew where the guards went when they clocked out. He spread 3 photographs on the bed. They were grainy, taken by a private investigator. Bumpy hired him through a lawyer months ago. The first photo showed a man with a red nose and watery eyes slumped on a bar stool. Officer Miller, the night shift guard, the one who watched while Graves kicked the food away. Miller wasn't evil like Graves. He was weak, a follower who laughed at jokes because he was too scared not to. But silence is a sin too. Miller watched a man starve and did nothing. The second photo showed a man with thick arms and a crew cut working on a car in a driveway. Officer O'Malley. The muscle. O'Malley liked using his baton. He treated inmate ribs like xylophone keys. He broke Bumpy's arm in 1961 for insubordination. It never healed right. It still clicked when it rained. The third photo was the centerpiece. Lieutenant Bulldog Graves. He looked older in the picture. Civilian clothes instead of a uniform. Retired now, living the good life on a pension padded by years of bribes. He was smiling in the photo, holding a fishing rod. That smile turned Bumpy's blood to ice. It was the smile of a man who thought he got away with it. Bumpy lifted Miller's photograph. "You are the first to fall," he whispered into the void. He waited for darkness. The rain returned. A relentless drumming against the glass. Bumpy dressed with deliberate slowness. Charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, and a tie as black as night. He polished his shoes until they were black mirrors. He was not dressing for a brawl. He was dressing for a funeral. He faced the man in the glass. The face staring back was gaunt. Cheekbones sharpened like blades. Eyes hollowed by years of sleeping with one eye open. Yet weakness had vanished. In its place, a cold, razor-sharp focus remained. He slid leather gloves into his pocket. No prints left behind. He carried no iron. He needed no gun for Miller. Miller was already a broken man. He just did not know it yet. Bumpy rode to the docks. The air reeked of diesel and rotting catch. He found the rusty anchor easily. It was a hole, a place where men went to drink, until they forgot their own names. Bumpy stepped into the gloom. The bartender, a massive ox with a mermaid tattoo, looked up. He saw a black man in a tailored suit and froze. In 1963, down here, that meant trouble. But Bumpy's eyes said this wasn't trouble you threw out. It was trouble you poured a drink for. Bumpy swept the room. 4 men sat at the bar. 3 were dockers, loud and laughing. The 4th sat in solitude at the far end, staring into a glass of amber poison. Officer Miller. He looked worse than the picture. Skin like old parchment, shoulders crushed by invisible weights. He wore a stained jacket that had died years ago. He muttered to himself, tracing the glass rim with a trembling finger. Bumpy approached. The click of expensive leather on wood was distinct, a judge's gavel. He pulled out the stool beside Miller and sat. Miller did not look up. "Seats taken," he slurred. "I think not," Bumpy replied. His voice was low, gravel wrapped in velvet. Miller turned to stone. His finger stopped. That voice. He had heard it every night for 5 years. It was the voice that quoted Dante from the darkness of the hole. The voice that refused to beg. Miller turned his head, neck creaking like a rusty hinge. He squinted, his mind struggling to process the ghost sitting beside him. Johnson? Hello, Mr. Miller, Bumpy said. He signaled the barman. A bottle of your best, and 2 clean glasses. Miller pushed himself, back against the wood, eyes wide with terror. He scanned the room, but the workers were too busy arguing baseball to see a dead man walking. You? You can't be here. You're in the Rock. Not anymore, Bumpy said. The bottle arrived. Bumpy poured a shot for himself, and one for Miller. I am a free man, a tourist, just visiting old friends. We ain't friends, Miller stammered, hand creeping toward his jacket pocket. Bumpy's hand struck like a cobra, clamping over Miller's wrist, a grip of cold iron. For a starved man, Bumpy held terrifying power. Don't reach for the piece, Miller. You're drunk. You'll shoot your foot off. Besides, I am not here for blood. If I wanted to hurt you, I would have slit your throat in the alley. Miller trembled, the fight draining out of him instantly. What do you want? I want to have a drink, Bumpy said, releasing the wrist. Drink. Miller seized the glass with shaking hands and downed it. He coughed, wiping his mouth. Look, Johnson, I know you're sore, but it wasn't me. It was Graves. He was the lieutenant. I just followed orders. I got a wife. I got kids. I know, Bumpy said softly. I know about Sarah. I know about your daughter, Jenny. 10 years old? St. Mary's? Miller's face drained of blood. You stay away from them. I have no interest in your family, Miller. I am not a monster. That is the difference. You watched a man starve and laughed. I watched you starve your own soul and felt pity. Bumpy poured another shot. You see, I know you. I know why you drink. You drink to drown the screams. You drink because you know D-Block was a sin against God. Miller stared at the glass. Tears welled in bloodshot eyes. I couldn't stop him. Graves is crazy. He would have crushed me. Fear, Bumpy nodded. Fear makes men do terrible things, but fear has a price. Bumpy reached into his jacket. Miller flinched, expecting steel. Instead, Bumpy produced a folded document. He smoothed it on the bar. It was a confession, a detailed, lethal admission of corruption inside the Rock. The smuggling, the brutality, the theft of funds. What is this? Miller asked. This is your penance, Bumpy said. You are going to sign. You will admit to the smuggling. You will name Graves as the king. And then you will take it to the district attorney. Miller laughed. A wet, hysterical sound. Are you crazy? I sign that, I go to prison. I lose my family. True, Bumpy said, sipping his drink. But if you don't sign, I have another envelope. This one goes to the Italians in North Beach, the crew you and Graves were robbing. You took bribes for cigarettes, but you skimmed the top, didn't you? Miller stopped laughing. The silence of the grave followed. Stealing from the mob wasn't a prison sentence. It was a death warrant. If the Italians find out, Bumpy said calmly, they won't put you in a cell. They will put you in a barrel and drop you in the bay. And they won't stop there. They'll come for the money. They'll visit Sarah. They'll visit Jenny. Miller sobbed openly, burying his face in his hands. He was trapped. On one side, prison and ruin. On the other, a massacre. Why are you doing this? Miller wept. Because you took 5 years from me, Bumpy said. I am merely seizing your tomorrow. Consider it a square deal. He slid the pen across the mahogany like a loaded gun. Sign the paper. Go to the feds. Bury Graves. It is the only play where you keep breathing. Miller stared at the instrument of his betrayal. His fingers trembled as he grasped it. He scanned Bumpy's face, hunting for a scrap of pity. He found a void. He found only the arctic gaze of a soul who had walked through the inferno and returned carrying the torch. Miller put ink to paper. He signed his soul away. Bumpy claimed the document, folding it with precise, lethal calm before tucking it into his breast pocket. He rose, fastening his coat. You made the smart play, Miller. Drink up, the tab is mine. Bumpy exited the establishment, leaving a shattered shell of a man sobbing into his glass. The rain felt like a baptism on his skin. One target down, but Miller was merely the appetizer. The main course would be a tougher chew, O'Malley. Bumpy dedicated the next day to stalking O'Malley's den, a second-floor walk-up in a neighborhood that smelled of sweat and desperation. O'Malley flexed muscle as a bouncer now at a joint in the Tenderloin, sleeping till noon, pumping iron in the afternoon, and breaking heads at night. A creature of simple violence and routine. Bumpy waited until the clock struck 8. He shadowed the beast to the club, observing from the darkness across the street. He watched O'Malley hurl a drunk onto the concrete, delivering a rib-cracking kick to the fallen man. O'Malley hadn't evolved. He still craved the sound of snapping bone. He still was addicted to the dominance. Bumpy calculated that the club was too public, too many eyes. He would strike where the beast felt untouchable, his sanctuary. At 3 in the morning, O'Malley returned to his cage. Bumpy watched the lights flicker and die. He waited 60 minutes. The street was a graveyard. A stray cat overturned a bin, the solitary note in the symphony of silence. Bumpy navigated to the rear. The fire escape beckoned. He leaped, gripping the cold iron, and hauled himself up. His ribs screamed. The muscle had not fully regenerated, but adrenaline was a potent drug. He ascended to the second level. The window was ajar, inviting the night breeze. Bumpy gazed into the abyss. O'Malley was passed out in a recliner, sawing logs. A half-devoured sandwich rested on his chest like a tombstone. A heavy bat rested against the wall, a sentry at his side. Bumpy slid the sash up. Wood groaned. O'Malley grunted but remained in the dark. Bumpy crossed the threshold. He loomed over his prey. Execution would be simple here. A blade to the jugular, a pillow to silence the breath. But that was not the lesson. O'Malley required suffering. He needed to learn that brute force is nothing before a superior intellect. Bumpy claimed the baseball bat. He tested its balance. Solid ash, built for destruction. He tapped the sole of O'Malley's boot. Rise and shine. Sunshine. O'Malley's eyelids snapped open. For a heartbeat, confusion reigned. Then the animal instinct kicked in. He saw the Grim Reaper standing over him and exploded from the chair, roaring, "Who goes there?" He moved with terrifying speed. He tackled Bumpy, driving him backward into the plaster. The air left Bumpy's lungs in a rush. O'Malley hammered a fist into Bumpy's flank, targeting the exact spot where starvation had thinned the bone. Agony bloomed in Bumpy's chest like a firework. "You chose the wrong territory, pal," O'Malley bellowed, cocking his arm for a knockout blow. Bumpy remained ice-cold. He was forged in the prison yard. Against killers with shanks and zero hope, he torqued his body, driving a knee into O'Malley's pillars. The giant grunted, his vice grip slipping. Bumpy brought the timber down hard on O'Malley's collarbone. The snap was sickening. O'Malley howled and stumbled back, clutching the ruined shoulder. He squinted at the intruder, vision clearing. "Johnson?" "In the flesh," Bumpy rasped, adjusting his necktie. "You are a ghost," O'Malley charged once more, leading with his good shoulder like a battering ram. No technique, just the desire to crush. Bumpy sidestepped the bull. He swung low, targeting the foundation. The wood connected with a meaty thud. O'Malley's leg collapsed. He hit the deck hard, face greeting the floorboards. "Stay grounded," Bumpy commanded. He stood over him, chest heaving. But O'Malley was a wild beast. He snatched Bumpy's ankle and yanked, bringing the strategist crashing down. The weapon skittered out of reach. They brawled in the shadows. O'Malley had the weight. He mounted Bumpy, hands closing around the windpipe. "I should have finished you in the yard," O'Malley spat, thumbs digging into the larynx. Darkness encroached on Bumpy's vision. Bumpy's hand swept the floor, desperate for an equalizer. His fingers grazed cold glass, an ashtray. He seized it and smashed it against O'Malley's temple. The giant roared. Crimson flowed from his ear, yet the grip held. Bumpy reached again. His fingers found the ashwood. With a primal shout, he thrust the handle upward into the ribs. O'Malley wheezed, oxygen fleeing his system, his grip failing. Bumpy bucked, throwing the Leviathan off him. He scrambled to a vertical base. O'Malley attempted to rise, but his knee betrayed him. He collapsed, gasping, blood painting a mask on his face. Bumpy delivered a boot to the sternum, pinning him to the wall. "Do you recall 1961? Bumpy asked, voice like gravel. "You snapped my arm because my obedience was too slow." "Go to hell," O'Malley groaned. "I have toured that place," Bumpy replied. "You booked my ticket." Bumpy raised the judgment. He did not aim for the skull. He aimed for the leg, the functional one. He swung with every ounce of reserve energy. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The bone disintegrated. O'Malley's scream was ancient. It tore through the tenement, a melody of pure torture. He curled up, weeping, clutching the ruin of his limb. "That settles the arm," Bumpy declared. Sweat slicked his skin, his breath ragged. He gazed down at the tyrant of D-Block, now merely a sobbing pile of meat on a cheap rug. "And this," Bumpy added, dropping the bat onto O'Malley's chest, "is for the starvation." He marched to the icebox. He threw it open, stocked with brew and cold cuts. Bumpy grabbed a carton of milk and inverted it over the floorboards. Right before O'Malley's tear-filled eyes, he tossed a package of ham into the puddle. "Feast, O'Malley," Bumpy whispered. "Do not let it spoil." He exited via the window just as fists pounded on the front door. The neighbors, the law was en route. Bumpy limped down the iron escape, melting into the alley's embrace. His side throbbed, his throat burned, but his soul? His soul was weightless. The debt had been paid, but the game? That was far from finished. As Bumpy walked back toward his motel, the sun was just starting to crack the horizon. A telephone screamed in a fancy suburban house in Pacific Heights. Lieutenant Graves sat up in bed. He snatched the phone. "Yeah? Lieutenant," a voice whispered. It was Miller. He was calling from a payphone right outside the police station. "Moments before I turn myself in, he's here." "Who?" Graves asked, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "Johnson. Bumpy Johnson. He found me at the bar. He made me sign a paper. Lieutenant, he knows everything about the smuggling operation. He knows about the money." Graves sat up straight, the blood draining from his face. "You idiot! What did you do?" "I had to. He threatened my family. And listen, O'Malley, I just heard it on the scanner. An ambulance was called to his place. Massive trauma, leg completely shattered. They say it looked like a sledgehammer hit him." Graves slammed the phone down. His hand was trembling. He looked out the window at his manicured lawn, his prize rose bushes, his peaceful life. It was all a lie. The ghost had followed him home. Bumpy Johnson was coming. But Graves didn't panic. He wasn't weak like Miller or stupid like O'Malley. He was a predator. He walked to his closet and unlocked a heavy safe. Inside wasn't just cash, it was a Rolodex. Names of men who owed him favors. Dangerous men. Men who killed for a living. He dialed a number. "This is Graves," he said into the receiver. "I have a pest problem. A big one. I need a cleaning crew at my house tonight, and bring the heavy equipment." He hung up and walked to the kitchen. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat at the table, placing a loaded .45 caliber pistol next to the sugar bowl. "Come on, Bumpy," Graves whispered, his eyes cold as ice. "Come and get your dinner." Miles away, Bumpy Johnson sat on the edge of his motel bed, icing his ribs. He stared at the third photo, the photo of Graves, smiling. He struck a match and held it to the corner of the picture. He watched Graves's face curl and blacken, turning into ash. The easy part was over. Now the war began. The fog had swallowed Pacific Heights whole. It was a thick, soupy gray that muffled the sound of the distant foghorns on the Golden Gate Bridge. It turned the streetlights into hazy, floating islands of yellow. Inside the two-story Victorian house at the end of the cul-de-sac, the stage was set. Lieutenant Bulldog Graves sat in his leather armchair, a glass of scotch trembling in his hand. The house was dark, save for a single lamp on the desk. He had sent his wife to her sister's in Sacramento, telling her it was a plumbing emergency. The truth was far messier. The plumbing was fine. It was the past that was backing up. Graves checked his watch. 2:15 a.m. Silence. He wasn't alone. He had called in favors from the cleaning crew. 3 men he knew from his days shaking down the docks. They were ex-military, dishonorably discharged, men who killed for cash and didn't ask questions. One was stationed in the kitchen with a shotgun. One was upstairs in the guest bedroom with a view of the street, armed with a rifle. The third, a knife specialist named Carver, was prowling the backyard garden. "Come on, you piece of trash," Graves whispered to the empty room. "Make a move." Graves was terrified, but he was also arrogant. He believed in walls. He believed in guns. He believed that the systems of power that allowed him to starve men in Alcatraz would hold. He thought they would protect him here in his castle. He didn't understand that Bumpy Johnson didn't fight walls. He walked through them. Bumpy was already there. He had been there for an hour, crouched on the roof of the neighbor's garage, watching the house through the mist. He saw the shadow moving in the upstairs window. He saw the glow of a cigarette in the backyard bushes. He counted the men, 3 hired guns plus Graves. 4 against 1. Bumpy smiled. In Alcatraz, the odds were usually 50 guards against 1 inmate. 4 felt fair. He didn't have a gun. He had a plan. A length of piano wire bought at a hardware store in Oakland, and a heavy wrench stolen from a toolbox at the motel. But his greatest weapon was the darkness. He knew how to live in it. These men were used to electric lights and open spaces. Bumpy had spent 30 days in a hole where he couldn't see his own hand in front of his face. He was the king of the dark. He moved. He slipped down the side of the garage, landing silently on the wet grass of the neighbor's lawn. He crawled to the fence separating the properties. Through the slats, he could see Carver pacing near the rose bushes. Carver was impatient, stamping his feet to stay warm, his knife glinting every time he passed the kitchen window light. Bumpy picked up a small stone and tossed it against the side of the house, away from where he was hiding. Clack! Carver spun around. "Who's there?" Silence. Carver crept toward the noise, moving away from the fence. Bumpy vaulted over the wood, landing in the soft earth of the flower bed. He moved low, a shadow detaching itself from the night. He came up behind Carver just as the man realized he had been tricked. Carver turned, raising his knife, but Bumpy was already inside his guard. Bumpy didn't use the wire yet. He used the wrench. A short, brutal chop to the wrist sent the knife flying into the hydrangeas. Carver opened his mouth to scream, but Bumpy's other hand clamped over his face, pushing his head back. Bumpy swept the man's legs, driving him into the mud. "Sleep," Bumpy whispered. He brought the wrench down on the man's temple. Not a killing blow. Bumpy wasn't a butcher, but enough to turn the lights out for a few hours. Carver went limp. Bumpy dragged him into the deep shadows of the hedges and covered him with a tarp. 1 down. Bumpy looked at the house. The kitchen light was the problem. It cast a pool of illumination into the yard. It made the approach impossible. He needed to blind them. He located the fuse box on the side of the house. It was locked with a padlock. Bumpy didn't have a key, but he had the wrench. 1 hard twist shattered the hasp. He cracked the panel, exposing the main breaker. A single breath steadied his nerves. Pulling this lever meant declaring war. Clunk. The house plunged into an abyss of absolute darkness. Inside, panic erupted instantly. "What the hell?" a voice shouted from the kitchen. "Graves, the power is dead. Silence!" Graves roared from the living room, his authority cracking. He had severed the line. Eyes wide, death was approaching. Bumpy ghosted to the back door. Locked, but the glass barrier was fragile. He wrapped his fist in his jacket and smashed through a small pane near the lock. He reached inside, clicked the latch, and slid the door open like a whisper in the wind. The shattering glass was drowned out by footsteps thundering upstairs. Bumpy stepped into the kitchen domain. The scent of terror hung heavy in the air, sweat and stale tobacco. He crouched in the shadow of the center island. The gunman, a hulking brute named Miller, was fumbling desperately with a lighter. The flames sparked, carving his terrified face out of the gloom for a split second. Flick, light. Flick, dark. In that void, Bumpy made his move. He glided across the linoleum in socks, silent as a phantom. When the lighter sparked again, the Reaper was standing right beside him. Miller yelped, swinging the shotgun in a blind panic. The blast roared through the tight space, tearing a gaping hole in the refrigerator door. Milk and shards sprayed like shrapnel. The flash blinded Miller, but Bumpy had shut his eyes before the trigger broke. He seized the scorching barrel, twisting it skyward. He drove a knee into Miller's gut, folding him like a cheap suit. Then, the piano wire looped around his neck. Not to kill, to dominate. He cinched it just enough to strangle the airflow. Miller gagged, dropping the weapon, clawing at his throat. Bumpy whispered, "Silence," or "I sever the cord." He dragged the gasping man to the pantry and shoved him into the darkness, wedging a chair under the knob. Miller kicked and thumped, but his cage was sealed. 2 down. "Miller? Carver?" Graves screamed from the living room. "Report!" Silence answered him. Just the rain and the muffled thumps. "He is inside!" Graves shrieked. "Richards, get down here!" Richards, the rifleman, came thundering down the stairs, his flashlight slicing the dark wildly. He was the supposed professional of this crew. He did not rush. He swept the beam with calculated precision. Bumpy pressed flat against the wall behind a grandfather clock, watching the light cut through the floating dust. Richards hit the landing. He swept the light left to the living room, then right to the kitchen. His eyes locked on the open pantry door. He saw the decimated fridge. "Clear the kitchen," Richards muttered, swinging his rifle toward the chaos. Bumpy stepped from the clock's shadow. He was already behind Richards, a gentle tap on the shoulder. Richards spun, driving the rifle butt up for a killing smash. He was fast, but Bumpy had spent 5 years boxing demons in a cell. He ducked the swing, slipping inside the guard. A punch drove into Richards' solar plexus. A short, devastating jab that collapsed the man's lungs. Richards folded. Bumpy seized his head and drove it into the wall. The drywall cracked under the impact. Richards slid to the floor, lights out. Bumpy retrieved the flashlight. He clicked it off. He did not need light. It was just the two of them now. Bumpy stalked toward the living room. Graves was there, cowering behind his mahogany desk. His pistol trembled at the doorway. He was hyperventilating, wheezing like a broken accordion. "I know you are there, Johnson," Graves yelled, his voice fracturing. "I have a gun. You come through that door. I will blow your head off." "You had a gun in D Block, too." Bumpy's voice drifted from the abyss. It seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere. "It did not save you then. It will not save you now." "I was doing my job," Graves pleaded, his bravado turning to dust. "You were a criminal. You deserved it." "I was a man," Bumpy corrected, "and you tried to break me into an animal. But you forgot one thing, Lieutenant. Animals hold grudges." Bumpy tossed a wrench into the room. It clattered violently against the hardwood floor to the left. Graves snapped. He fired 3 rounds at the noise. Bang, bang, bang. Muzzle flashes strobed like lightning, exposing Graves's face sweaty, pale as death, eyes wide with terror. Bumpy moved between the flashes. He dove low, rolling to the right. He rose like a specter behind the leather armchair. 3 shots, Bumpy stated calmly from the gloom. "You have 4 left in that clip, Lieutenant. Unless your shaking hands made you lose count." "Show yourself," Graves screamed, spinning the chair. "You like the dark, don't you?" Bumpy asked, his voice ice cold. "You kept me in it for 30 days. You said it cleansed the soul. Let us see how your soul is faring." Bumpy seized a heavy crystal decanter and hurled it. It shattered against the wall behind Graves. Graves spun and fired blindly. Bang, bang. 2 left, Bumpy counted. Graves was hyperventilating, spinning in circles, pointing the barrel at phantoms. Where are you? Fight me like a man." "I am fighting you like a man," Bumpy said, rising slowly from the shadows. "The man you created." Graves saw the silhouette rising. He aimed. He pulled the trigger. Click. Graves stared at the gun. He had miscounted, or perhaps fear had jammed it. It did not matter. The weapon was dead weight. Bumpy stepped into the pale moonlight. He looked massive, a vengeful demon clad in a charcoal suit. Graves dropped the gun, scrambling backward and overturning his chair. He crawled to the fireplace, clutching a poker. "Stay back!" Graves shrieked. Bumpy did not pause. He walked straight into the swing. Graves struck. Bumpy caught the iron in a gloved hand. He did not even blink. He ripped it from Graves's grip and tossed it aside like trash. Bumpy reached down, seizing Graves by the lapels of his expensive smoking jacket. He hoisted the man into the air effortlessly. Graves kicked and flailed, feet dangling helplessly. "Please," Graves sobbed, tears finally breaking through. "Please, Johnson, I will give you money. The safe is full. Take it. Just leave." "I do not want your money," Bumpy said, pulling Graves close. "I want your dignity." Bumpy threw him. Graves flew across the room, crashing through the French doors. Glass exploded outward. Graves landed in the wet mud of his prize-winning rose garden. Gasping for air in the dirt, Bumpy stepped through the shattered frame, boots hitting the grass. The rain poured harder now, washing the blood from the cuts on Graves's face. "Get up," Bumpy commanded. Graves scrambled to his feet, trying to run toward the gate. Bumpy cut his retreat short, a stiff shove sending the lieutenant stumbling back toward the yard's center. "Where do you think you're going, Lieutenant? We have unfinished business." With a cold stride, Bumpy headed for the shed against the fence. He shattered the lock with a kick, emerging seconds later, gripping a rusted shovel. He cast it down at Graves' feet. It hit the muck with a heavy, sickening squelch. "Pick it up," Bumpy commanded. "What?" Graves' hands shook violently, eyes darting from the steel blade to Bumpy's stone face. You intend to kill me? You want me to dig my own grave?" "Maybe," Bumpy replied, his voice devoid of warmth. "Depends on your speed." "I can't," Graves wailed. "It's pouring rain. I am an old man." "You weren't too old when you watched me starve and eat insects off the concrete," Bumpy said, his tone dropping to a lethal growl. "Dig." Graves scanned the house frantically. No saviors were coming. He searched the neighbors' windows, but they remained black and silent. His gaze snapped back to Bumpy. Only death stood before him. Trembling, he gripped the shovel and struck the earth. The soil was a waterlogged weight. Graves was soft, a man of paper. His muscles, withered by years of desk duty and gluttony, burned instantly. A pathetic groan escaped him with every heave. The relentless rain plastered his gray hair to his skull. His fine silk pajamas clung to his shivering frame like a second skin. Bumpy watched him with the stillness of a statue, rain dripping rhythmically from his hat's brim. He found no pleasure in this spectacle. There was no joy, only cold necessity. It was a business transaction. You strip a man of his humanity. You pay the price with your own. 10 minutes dragged by. Graves stood shin-deep in mud, leaning on the handle, lungs wheezing. "Keep digging," Bumpy ordered. "Please." Graves gasped, clutching his chest. "My heart. I can't go on. My ribs pierced my skin in that cell," Bumpy countered flatly. "I couldn't stand, yet you kicked me to force me up. Dig!" Graves broke into sobs, the shovel striking earth again. 20 minutes, knee-deep. 30 minutes, thigh-deep. Finally, Graves collapsed to his knees in the sludge. He retched, emptying his stomach from pure exhaustion. "Kill me," he whispered. "Defeated. Just end it. I cannot do this anymore." Bumpy stepped to the lip of the pit. He looked down at the man who had played God over his existence for 5 long years. The bulldog, the nightmare of D Block. Now, simply a pathetic, mud-caked elder weeping in a hole. Bumpy felt the inferno of rage within him. It finally began to ebb away, replaced by a profound, icy disgust. This was the monster he had feared? This weak, hollow vessel. "Stand up," Bumpy commanded. Graves struggled to rise, swaying like a reed in the wind. "Is this the end? Is this where the bullet comes?" "I told you," Bumpy said. "I do not carry a gun." He scanned the yard, eyes locking on a massive stone birdbath. He strode over and shoved the heavy top basin free. It was a solid disc of concrete. He rolled it to the grave's edge. "You like the hole, Lieutenant?" Bumpy asked. "You always said it gives a man time to think, time to reflect on his sins." "No!" The horror of realization struck Graves. "No, Johnson, you can't leave me in here. It's freezing. I'll die." "You won't freeze," Bumpy stated coldly. "This is California. You'll just be miserable, hungry, thirsty, and afraid." Bumpy shoved Graves down into the darkness. Graves scrambled, clawing at the walls, but the mud was too slick. He slid back into the mire. "Don't do this!" Graves screamed. I'm sorry for the starvation. Everything!" "I believe you," Bumpy said. With a grunt of effort, he slid the heavy concrete basin over the hole's mouth. It didn't seal completely. Narrow gaps remained for air. But it was far too heavy for the weak man to lift from below without leverage. He was trapped in the suffocating dark. "Johnson!" Graves' voice was muffled now, a ghostly echo rising from the earth. "Johnson, help me!" Bumpy stood atop the stone lid. He heard the scratching, the crying, the begging. It sounded exactly like the damned souls of D-Block. "I called the police from your kitchen," Bumpy said, his voice piercing the ground. "I reported a domestic disturbance. They'll arrive in 10 minutes, maybe 20. Until then, you are in solitary confinement. Don't leave me. Goodbye, Bulldog." Bumpy whispered the farewell. He turned his back, stepping over the unconscious lump of Carver in the bushes, and vaulted the fence. He strolled down the quiet, fog-laden street, leaving the house of horrors in his wake. Behind him, the muffled screams of Lieutenant Graves persisted, a ghost haunting his own garden. When the police arrived, they would discover a scene of absolute madness. 3 hitmen bound and unconscious in the house, and the homeowner, the respected Lieutenant Graves, buried in his own backyard, screaming about a demon named Bumpy Johnson. His career would be ash, his reputation shattered beyond repair. He would become the department's greatest punchline, and every time he closed his eyes, he would feel the crushing weight of the earth pressing in on him. Bumpy walked for miles. He walked until the sun burned away the morning fog. He found a diner near the train station just unlocking its doors. He took a seat at the counter. "Coffee," Bumpy ordered, "and pancakes, 3 stacks. The waitress filled his cup. "Hungry morning, hun?" Bumpy stared at the steam rising from the black coffee. He took a long, deep breath. For the first time in 5 hellish years, the gnawing rat in his chest was silent. The weight was gone. Starving, a faint smile touched Bumpy's lips. "But I think I'm finally ready to eat." He ate with deliberation, tasting the syrup, the butter, the bitter roast. It was the finest meal of his life. Not for the culinary quality, but because it tasted of freedom. 2 days later, the train hissed into Grand Central Station, New York City. The noise hit him like a physical blow. The horns, the shouting, the pulse of the greatest city on earth. Bumpy stepped onto the platform, suitcase in hand. He inhaled the grimy, gasoline-scented air deep into his lungs. It smelled like home. He hailed a cab uptown. As the car crossed 110th Street, crossing the border into Harlem, the tension finally left Bumpy's shoulders. The buildings stood taller here, the sidewalks alive with his people. He spotted the corner boys running numbers. He saw the jazz clubs waking up for the night. He saw the kingdom he had built, waiting for his return. The cab halted before the Lenox Terrace apartments. Bumpy paid the fare and stepped out, smoothing his suit jacket. He adjusted the brim of his hat. He looked up at the 3rd-floor window. The light was on. With a steady heart, he walked into the lobby. The doorman, Pops, looked up from the rag. His jaw hit the floor. "Mr. Johnson?" Pops stuttered. Is that really you?" "It's me, Pops," Bumpy said cold. "I'm back." "Lord have mercy," we heard the whispers. "But wait, till Mrs. Johnson sees you." Bumpy took the lift up. That ride felt like it took a lifetime. The doors slid open. He walked the hall to apartment 3B. He stood before the wood. He raised a hand to knock, then stopped. His hand shook, just a bit. Not fear, but love. He rapped 3 times, sharp. The code, silence. Then footsteps, clicking heels fast on the parquet. The lock turned. The door swung wide. May Johnson stood there. She wore a house coat, silk scarf on her head. She looked older, tired, worry lines cut deep around her eyes. But seeing him, 10 years just melted off. Her hands flew to her mouth. Tears spilled right then, running down her face. "Bumpy?" she whispered. "Hello, Queen," Bumpy said, voice thick. She threw herself at him. Bumpy caught her, burying his face in her neck, breathing in her scent. It was the only thing kept him sane in the dark. He held her tight, lifting her up, spinning her in the hall. "You're home," she sobbed. "You're really home." "I'm home, Mamie," Bumpy said, putting her down but holding on. "And I ain't leaving again." She pulled back, tracing the new scars, the hollows of his cheeks. She saw the hunger, the damage, but she saw the fire in his eyes too. He didn't come back broken. He came back made of iron. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Did they hurt you?" Bumpy looked past her into the warm apartment. He thought of Miller signing the confession. He thought of O'Malley's shattered leg. He thought of Graves screaming in the hole. "They tried," Bumpy said, "but I settled the tab." He walked inside and shut the door. The world outside, the cops, the Italians, the enemies, they'd be waiting tomorrow. There were wars to fight. Young punks thinking they could take his crown, new bosses trying to muscle in on the dope trade. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, the king was home. Bumpy walked to the kitchen. Mamie was moving already, pulling food from the icebox, wiping her eyes. "I'll make you something. You look too thin, Bumpy. We gotta get some meat on those bones." Bumpy sat at the table. He watched her move. He watched the city lights shining through the glass. He put his hands on the table, steady as rock. The screws at Alcatraz tried to starve him out, thought taking his food took his power. They were wrong. Hunger didn't kill Bumpy Johnson. It sharpened him, burned away the fat and the doubt, leaving only the steel underneath. "Mame?" Bumpy asked. "Yes, baby? Make it a big plate." Bumpy grinned, that old dangerous light back in his eyes. "I got a lot of work to do." Sitting there, hearing his wife cook in the low hum of Harlem, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson made a silent vow. He would never go hungry again. And anybody trying to take from his plate, well, they could ask Bulldog Graves what happens when you starve a lion. The legend was back, and the feast was just starting. Thanks for listening, folks. If you liked this and want more, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss a single Bumpy Johnson story.